Chapter 1. Shattered Harmony. Kael and Ardyn, the two most talented yet volatile members of Ecliptica, clash during a heated rehearsal. Ardyn accuses Kael of sabotaging their chances at success, while Kael fires back, claiming Ardyn's arrogance drives the group apart. Their argument escalates into a physical altercation, shocking the rest of the group. As emotions flare, a strange surge of magic erupts between them, leaving the room in chaos. The other members, Leora and Soren, witness the magical outburst in horror. Magic in an alpha-to-alpha pairing is unheard of, and the consequences are unknown. Kael and Ardyn, both furious and shaken, deny any connection. However, their bodies begin reacting to the magical bond, leading to overwhelming physical and emotional tension. Their group's manager, Rhea, warns them to keep their newfound powers hidden, fearing the Dragon Slayer Syndicate will target them. The chapter ends with Kael storming out of the rehearsal room, swearing to never let the bond dictate his life. While Ardyn watches him leave, his emotions a mix of anger and confusion. Chapter 2. The Unseen Threat. Kael begins noticing changes in his body, heightened senses, surges of uncontrollable energy, and an unexplainable pull toward Ardyn. Meanwhile, Ardyn struggles to suppress his growing attraction to Kael, despite their animosity. Rhea gathers the group and reveals the truth about the Dragon Slayer Syndicate. The Syndicate's mission is to eliminate magical anomalies, particularly bonded alphas, whom they deem as threats to the world's balance. Ecliptica's survival now hinges on keeping Kael and Ardyn's bond a secret. During a tense moment in the group's dormitory, Kael confronts Ardyn about the strange connection between them. Their argument turns dangerously intimate when their suppressed emotions ignite. However, Kael pulls away, accusing Ardyn of using the bond to manipulate him. Unbeknownst to the group, the Syndicate has already caught wind of Kael and Ardyn's magical outburst. Their spies begin closing in, setting the stage for an imminent confrontation. Chapter 3. Unbreakable Chain. During a live performance, Kael and Ardyn's bond triggers another magical surge, stunning the audience and overshadowing their non-magic act. The Syndicate's agents, disguised as fans, immediately take notice and begin tracking them. Kael confronts Rhea, demanding answers about why such a bond exists between two alphas. Rhea reveals an ancient prophecy about an alpha pair whose bond could either destroy or save the magical world. Despite her warnings, Kael refuses to accept his role in the prophecy. Ardyn, however, begins researching the bond, uncovering the painful truth about alpha pregnancies. When Kael finds out, he accuses Ardyn of selfishly tying him to a doomed fate. Their fight ends in a passionate, forbidden moment that neither can forget. The chapter concludes with the Syndicate launching a surprise attack on Ecliptica during a private rehearsal. The group barely escapes, but they realize the Syndicate will stop at nothing to destroy Kael and Ardyn. Chapter 4. Fleeing the Flame. Ecliptica goes into hiding, with Rhea taking them to an abandoned magical sanctuary outside the city. Kael struggles with the growing physical symptoms of his bond, including nausea and exhaustion, while Ardyn stays by his side despite their continued clashes. During their time in hiding, Kael and Ardyn's relationship deepens. Ardyn's protective instincts intensify as he starts to see Kael in a new light. However, their moments of intimacy are fraught with guilt and fear. The sanctuary's magical wards fail when the Syndicate discovers their location. In the chaos, Kael unleashes a devastating magical attack, revealing the full extent of his bond's power. Ardyn realizes Kael's magic is tied to the life growing inside him, a painful revelation that terrifies them both. The group barely escapes with their lives, but the Syndicate vows to capture Kael and Ardyn, believing their bond to be the key to fulfilling the prophecy. Chapter 5. A Fragile Refuge. Ecliptica finds temporary refuge in an underground network led by renegade magical idols who oppose the Dragon Slayer Syndicate. Among them is Oren, a beta with knowledge of alpha bonds, who reluctantly agrees to help Kael and Ardyn understand their connection. Kael's symptoms worsen, and Oren confirms what Ardyn suspected: Kael is carrying a child. The revelation shocks the group and leaves Kael in denial, furious at Ardyn for being the cause of his suffering. Their bond grows more volatile, with Kael lashing out at Ardyn, blaming him for the life-changing burden. Despite Kael's anger, Ardyn refuses to leave his side, determined to protect him. Their moments together are tense, yet small cracks begin to form in Kael's defenses as he sees Ardyn's genuine concern. However, the two remain too stubborn to fully trust one another. Meanwhile, the Syndicate intensifies its search, using spies to infiltrate the Renegade's network. The group realizes they can't stay hidden for long and must come up with a plan to fight back. Chapter 6. Unlikely Alliance. Orin introduces the group to Kael, a former Syndicate agent who defected after witnessing the organization's cruelty. Kael agrees to help Ecliptica infiltrate the Syndicate's stronghold to uncover the prophecy that binds Kael and Ardyn's fate. Tensions between Kael and Ardyn reach a breaking point when Kael attempts to suppress his magic, causing a dangerous backlash that nearly harms the baby. Ardyn intervenes, risking his own safety to stabilize Kael's power. Despite his anger, Kael starts to realize the depth of Ardyn's care. Kael warns that the prophecy is tied to ancient magic that could either save or destroy the world. If Kael and Ardyn can't find harmony, their bond could bring about catastrophic consequences. The group reluctantly agrees to trust Kael, though doubts linger. As they prepare for their mission, Kael and Ardyn share a rare, quiet moment. Kael finally admits his fear of the bond and the pregnancy, and Ardyn promises to stand by him, no matter what. Their fragile truce sets the stage for the challenges ahead. Chapter 7. Into the Lion's Den. Disguised as performers, Ecliptica infiltrates the Syndicate's stronghold during a grand gala. The group's magical energy is concealed by Kael's expertise, but Kael's growing bond with Ardyn makes it difficult to suppress their power. During their performance, Kael and Ardyn are forced to harmonize their magic to avoid detection. The act draws admiration from the crowd but also catches the attention of Vera, the Syndicate's ruthless second-in-command. Suspicious of their presence, Vera begins to investigate. While Rhea and Kael search for the prophecy scrolls, Kael and Ardyn find themselves cornered by Vera. Their bond flares in self-defense, exposing their identity. In the ensuing fight, Kael unleashes a devastating blast of magic that injures Vera but leaves him physically drained. The group escapes with the prophecy in hand, but Kael collapses from the strain. The incident leaves them shaken, knowing the Syndicate will now stop at nothing to capture them. Chapter 8. Revelations in the Scroll. Back at their hideout, Rhea and Kael decipher the prophecy scrolls. The text reveals that Kael and Ardyn's child is a being of immense power, capable of reshaping the magical balance of the world. However, it also warns of great sacrifice tied to their bond. Kael spirals into despair, feeling trapped by a fate he never wanted. Ardyn tries to comfort him, but Kael pushes him away, accusing him of causing all his suffering. Their bond flares with tension, pulling them closer even as they try to resist. Meanwhile, the Syndicate intensifies its hunt, with Vera recovering from her injuries and vowing revenge. She sends elite enforcers to track down Ecliptica, using forbidden magic to trace Kael and Ardyn's bond. As the group prepares for their next move, Kael begins to feel the baby's presence more strongly. Despite his anger and fear, a small part of him starts to wonder if the child could be a blessing rather than a curse. Chapter 9. A Tangle of Desire. As Ecliptica continues to hide from the Syndicate, the tension between Kael and Ardyn becomes unbearable. The undeniable pull of their bond is impossible to ignore, and their proximity leads to more than just heated words. One night, after a particularly intense argument about the risks of their pregnancy, Kael storms out to clear his head, only to find Ardyn waiting for him in the darkened courtyard. The cold night air does nothing to cool the fire between them. Ardyn steps closer, his hands trembling as he reaches out to Kael, who is still fighting against the pull of the bond. Before Kael can protest, Ardyn pulls him into a kiss, rough, desperate, and full of unspoken longing. Their lips meet in a storm of raw emotion, and Kael's resistance crumbles. As the kiss deepens, Kael's hands tangle in Ardyn's hair, the bond between them crackling with electric intensity. Ardyn's body presses against Kael's, and for a moment, nothing else matters. But reality sets in, and they pull away, gasping for air. Neither one of them says anything, but the silence is thick with the weight of their unspoken feelings. The moment fades, and Kael walks away, his heart a battleground between love and anger. Ardyn watches him go, feeling both victorious and heartbroken. Their bond may have been ignited in a kiss, but it's a dangerous fire they can't escape. Chapter 10. Underneath the Surface. Despite the kiss, Kael and Ardyn continue to deny their feelings, each trapped by their own pride and fear. However, the bond grows stronger, drawing them together even as they try to push apart. Kael becomes more irritable and distant, while Ardyn watches him with a mixture of longing and frustration. One evening, as a storm rages outside, the group finds themselves trapped in their hideout. Kael and Ardyn are forced to share a room for the night due to a lack of space. The proximity is unbearable, and neither can focus on anything other than the magnetic pull between them. Unable to resist any longer, Kael makes the first move. He steps forward, his hands reaching for Ardyn before he can stop himself. This time, the kiss is softer, more tentative, almost as if they're both afraid to admit how much they want it. Kael's lips press against Ardyn's, slow and deliberate, tasting the sweetness of a love they can't name. The kiss becomes more heated, each moment an admission of the bond they can no longer deny. But just as things begin to escalate, Kael pulls away, breathless and shaken. "This can't happen," he whispers, though his body betrays him. Ardyn nods, knowing the path they're on is a dangerous one. But neither can walk away. Chapter 11. Desire and Danger. The group's journey grows more perilous as the Syndicate closes in on them, their presence becoming more threatening with each passing day. Despite the external danger, the emotional tension between Kael and Ardyn reaches new heights. The bond has evolved into something undeniable, and they both struggle to keep their distance. One night, during a scouting mission, Kael and Ardyn are forced to hide together in a small cave. The closeness between them is overwhelming, and the air crackles with tension. Ardyn turns to Kael, his eyes dark with need. Before either can speak, he pulls Kael into another kiss, this one slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment before everything changes. Kael responds without thinking, his hands roaming over Ardyn's body as the kiss deepens. They share a moment of complete surrender, their bond flooding them with overwhelming emotions. As they break apart, both of them are panting, their bodies pressed together, and Kael can feel the baby moving inside him, an intimate reminder of their dangerous fate. But reality quickly sets in. Ardyn pulls away, his voice hoarse. "We can't keep doing this," he says, though his body betrays his words. Kael can only nod, knowing the battle between desire and responsibility has only just begun. Chapter 12. Torn Apart. As the days pass, Kael and Ardyn's struggles become more intense. The bond between them continues to pull them together, but each kiss only serves to remind them of the dangers they face. Kael, still angry and confused, pulls further away from Ardyn, unable to cope with the growing affection he feels. Ardyn, frustrated by Kael's reluctance, takes matters into his own hands. One evening, as they prepare for another confrontation with the Syndicate, Ardyn corners Kael in the training room. He doesn't give Kael a chance to speak before claiming his lips in a passionate kiss that leaves Kael breathless. The kiss is fierce, desperate, two souls finally surrendering to the bond that has controlled their lives from the very beginning. Kael's hands grip Ardyn's shoulders, pulling him closer as the kiss intensifies. For a moment, Kael forgets everything, his fears, his anger, the consequences of their bond. But just as quickly as it started, Kael pulls away, his heart racing. "This can't happen," he says again, though it's less convincing this time. Ardyn's gaze softens, but he doesn't argue. They both know the truth, and the truth is that they're trapped by the bond, by their feelings, and by the unstoppable force of destiny. Chapter 13. Echoes of the Past. The pressure on Kael and Ardyn continues to build as the group edges closer to the Syndicate's stronghold. Each encounter with the enemy intensifies their feelings, and the bond between them becomes harder to ignore. During one of their strategic meetings, Kael's frustration boils over, and he accuses Ardyn of using their connection to manipulate him. Ardyn is stunned by the accusation, but before he can defend himself, Kael steps forward, his anger mixing with his emotions. Without warning, Kael pulls Ardyn into a heated kiss, as if to prove that the bond is beyond their control. The kiss is filled with a mix of passion and accusation, a release of pent-up emotions that neither of them can fully comprehend. As they break apart, Kael stares at Ardyn, his breathing ragged. "This isn't what I want," he whispers, though his body betrays him, still drawn to Ardyn. Ardyn, equally torn, doesn't know how to respond. All he can do is reach out to touch Kael's face, his fingers trembling with uncertainty. The moment is fleeting, and the group is forced to move on. The stakes have never been higher, but both Kael and Ardyn are realizing that their greatest challenge might not be the Syndicate, but the growing bond between them that they cannot escape. Chapter 14. forbidden touch. As the days pass, the pressure on the two of them only increases. Kael begins to experience more physical signs of the pregnancy, and his magic grows more unstable, making it harder for him to control. Ardyn stays by his side, offering comfort, but Kael is too proud to accept it. Despite the emotional distance between them, their bodies continue to betray them. One night, during a particularly intense training session, Kael loses control of his magic. The surge of energy causes him to collapse, and Ardyn rushes to his side, instinctively pulling him into his arms. In the rush of concern and proximity, their lips meet once again in a kiss, this one desperate and filled with raw need. The kiss is fiery, all the emotion they've been holding back finally released. Ardyn's hands roam over Kael's body, the bond sparking with every touch. Kael, torn between his anger and desire, surrenders to the kiss, allowing himself to feel the depth of their connection. The kiss deepens, and the world outside their bubble fades into nothing. But reality sets in too quickly. Kael pulls away with a harsh breath, his eyes flashing with regret and shame. "This is wrong," he says, his voice cracking, but Ardyn knows he's lying. They both know. Chapter 17. A Shattered Promise. The weight of their kiss lingers in the air, and despite the overwhelming feelings between them, Kael and Ardyn know that the danger they face is far from over. The Syndicate's forces are closing in, and every moment spent in each other's company feels like a risk they cannot afford. But the bond between them is undeniable, impossible to ignore any longer. Ardyn's touch becomes more tender, but Kael pulls back, his expression filled with regret. "This was never supposed to happen," Kael whispers, his voice shaky with emotion. Ardyn's heart aches, but he refuses to let Kael go. "It's too late," Ardyn replies softly. "We've already crossed the line." Kael's body trembles as the bond intensifies, the magic surging within him uncontrollably. The pregnancy, already painful, only worsens, leaving Kael weak and vulnerable. He collapses into Ardyn's arms, his breathing shallow, and the Alpha's protective instincts take over. "I won't let you break," Ardyn vows, though both of them know the future is uncertain. As the threat from the Syndicate looms larger, Kael and Ardyn must face their feelings and their destiny. But with every passing moment, their connection becomes more intense, and neither knows how much longer they can keep resisting the love that is blossoming dangerously between them. Chapter 18. The Breaking Point. Tensions escalate when the group's next mission leads them into direct confrontation with the Syndicate's leader, a ruthless Alpha who has his sights set on Kael. The battle is fierce, and both Kael and Ardyn find themselves in peril. But their bond is undeniable, and they are pulled to one another like magnets. As the battle reaches its peak, Kael finds himself unable to control his powers, his emotions flooding out of him in a devastating wave of magic. Ardyn, in a desperate attempt to protect him, is struck by an enemy's blow, and the world slows down. Kael screams his name, running to his side, only to find Ardyn struggling to stay conscious. In a moment of pure instinct, Kael pulls Ardyn into a kiss, their lips crashing together in a desperate exchange. The kiss is electric, a clash of need, pain, and love. Their magic pulses between them, intensifying the kiss, but the pain in Kael's heart is too much to bear. He pulls away, his eyes filled with tears. "Don't you dare die on me," Kael breathes, his voice trembling. Ardyn forces a weak smile, but it's clear that their future is hanging by a thread. The battle is far from over, and the connection between them is becoming even more dangerous than they ever imagined. Chapter 19. Crossing the Line. In the aftermath of the battle, Kael and Ardyn are left to deal with the consequences of their actions. The bond between them has grown stronger, and with it comes an undeniable attraction that neither can ignore. Despite the chaos surrounding them, their emotions are raw and exposed, and they cannot hide from the truth any longer. One evening, as they sit alone together in the quiet of their hideout, Ardyn looks at Kael with intensity. "We can't keep doing this," he says, though his voice betrays his true feelings. Kael looks away, his heart pounding in his chest. "I know," he whispers, his hands clenched into fists. "But I can't stop myself." Their gazes lock, and before either can stop it, they find themselves pulled into another kiss, their lips desperate and hungry. The kiss is heated, filled with urgency and emotion. As their bodies press together, Kael moans softly, the pain of his pregnancy intensifying with every touch. But he doesn't care anymore. I love you, Kael breathes, his voice breaking as he clings to Ardyn. I can't keep pretending that I don't. Ardyn's breath hitches in his throat as he kisses Kael harder, the intensity of their bond overwhelming both of them. I love you too, he murmurs, his lips trembling against Kael's. Their love is a fire that can't be extinguished, no matter how dangerous it is. Chapter 20. The Price of Love. The days after their confession are filled with uncertainty and danger. Kael's pregnancy is taking a toll on his body, and Ardyn's concern for him grows stronger with every passing moment. Despite his own feelings, Ardyn is forced to focus on protecting Kael from the threats that continue to surround them. As Kael grows weaker, he begins to question whether their love is worth the cost. I can't keep doing this, he admits one night, his voice strained with pain. I can't keep fighting and hurting like this. I don't know how much longer I can last. Ardyn's heart breaks at the sight of Kael's suffering, but he refuses to let go. We'll make it through this, Ardyn promises, though doubt lingers in his heart. I'll protect you, Kael, no matter what it takes. Their kiss is slow, tender, but filled with the weight of everything they've been through. Their bond is unbreakable, but the future remains uncertain. In that moment, Kael realizes that he's no longer afraid of what lies ahead. His love for Ardyn has become a beacon of strength, and together they will face whatever challenges come their way. But as they hold each other, they know that their love is the one thing that could save or destroy them. Chapter 21. A Fateful Encounter. The morning after their emotional confrontation, Kael and Ardyn find themselves facing an unexpected visitor, a figure from Kael's past who seems to know everything about his magic and his pregnancy. The mysterious Alpha, a former ally turned enemy, steps into their camp with a smug grin. You've really made a mess of things, haven't you? The Alpha taunts, his eyes gleaming with malice. Kael's breath catches in his throat, and Ardyn stands protectively by his side. Leave us, Kael demands, his voice trembling, but the Alpha only laughs. You can't escape me. Not when the baby grows stronger, he says, sending a chill through the room. Ardyn steps forward, fury in his eyes, but Kael stops him with a gentle touch. I'm the one he wants, Kael says softly, trying to steady his racing heart. The past has come back to haunt him, and he's not sure how much longer he can fight it. But the connection between him and Ardyn gives him strength. We won't let him take anything from us, Ardyn whispers, his grip tightening on Kael's shoulder. But the weight of their past looms large, and the encounter with the Alpha serves as a stark reminder of the danger they face. The future feels more uncertain than ever before. Chapter 22. A Dangerous Proposition. The mysterious Alpha's visit leaves a trail of tension in its wake, and as Kael and Ardyn regroup, they are forced to confront the implications of their bond. Kael's pregnancy has become a powerful weapon in the eyes of their enemies, and the thought of losing everything they've worked for weighs heavily on them. In the middle of the night, Kael receives an unexpected proposition, an offer from the Syndicate to surrender, in exchange for the safety of both him and Ardyn. The message is clear: give up their fight and their love, or face a future filled with unimaginable pain. We can't trust them, Ardyn growls, his hand tightening around Kael's. They'll only use you, Kael. They always have. But Kael isn't so sure. The offer seems too good to pass up. Still, the thought of giving up everything he's fought for breaks something inside him. I'll never let them control us, Kael replies firmly. But the weight of the decision presses down on him. Can they truly escape the clutches of the Syndicate, or will they be forced to make a sacrifice that could destroy them both? Chapter 23. Betrayal and Sacrifice. In the days that follow, the tension between Kael and Ardyn reaches a boiling point. The Syndicate's grip tightens, and the pressure to give in grows unbearable. Kael's health deteriorates, the painful symptoms of his pregnancy making it difficult to focus. He knows that something has to give, but he can't bring himself to betray Ardyn. Ardyn, however, is willing to go to any lengths to protect Kael, even if it means betraying his own ideals. I'll do anything for you, Kael, he says, his voice rough with emotion. Even if it means surrendering to them. The words cut through Kael like a knife, but he knows that Ardyn is only trying to protect him. But the truth is far more complicated. The Syndicate's leader appears once more, promising Kael a life free of conflict in exchange for his submission. You don't have to fight anymore, the leader whispers, his voice cold and calculating. You're mine, Kael. In a moment of overwhelming pain and desperation, Kael makes a choice. He turns to Ardyn, his eyes filled with anguish. "I can't keep fighting," he admits, the tears streaming down his face. But Ardyn's love for him never falters. "No matter what happens, we'll face it together." Chapter 24. A Final Stand. The final battle approaches, and Kael and Ardyn know that there's no turning back. With the Syndicate's forces closing in, they are faced with an impossible choice: fight to the end or surrender to the enemy. As the tension builds, Kael's pregnancy reaches its peak, the pain becoming unbearable. Kael collapses, his body trembling from the exertion and the strain of the pregnancy. "I'm not strong enough," he whispers, his breath ragged. Ardyn kneels beside him, holding him close. "You don't have to do this alone, Kael. I'm here." His voice is filled with determination, but Kael can see the fear in his eyes. As they prepare for the final confrontation, the truth becomes clear. Their bond has brought them to this point, and it will either be their salvation or their downfall. But in that moment, Kael realizes that no matter what happens, he is willing to fight for their love. With one last kiss, a promise of their undying love, Kael and Ardyn step into the battle, knowing that whatever the outcome, they have each other. Chapter 25. Endings and Beginning. The battle is over, and the dust has settled. Kael and Ardyn stand victorious, but at a heavy cost. The Syndicate has been defeated, but the price of their freedom is clear. Kael's health has deteriorated to the point where he must remain in hiding for a time. But even in the face of uncertainty, there is hope. Kael, though weak, is still alive, and his bond with Ardyn has only grown stronger. They've faced the darkness together, and now they are free to build a future of their own. As they stand side by side, watching the sun rise on a new day, Kael whispers, "We made it, Ardyn. We're finally free." Ardyn's smile is bittersweet, but there is love in his eyes. "We've always been free, Kael. As long as we have each other, nothing else matters." Their story is far from over, but for now, they have everything they need. Their love, their bond, and the future they've fought for. And with that, they walk into the horizon, ready for whatever comes next.